And now we turn to the signature on the bottom right in the Madeleine Pulver ransom note. Paul Peters signed the ransom note with a typed email address, dirkstruan1840@gmail.com, which he had obtained through Google so that he could anonymously convey his ransom demands to Madeleine's father. Well, Dirk Struan, as it turns out, is a character in a novel by author James Clavell titled Taipan, and Paul Peters was known to be a fan of James Clavell novels and an enthusiast for Asian and Hong Kong history. 15 years previous to the Madeleine Pulver attack, in the United States, Boulder, Colorado, when police and the Ramseys surveyed the crime scene after Jonbenet's body was discovered in the basement, they made a list of anything they could find in the house that was unusual or out of place, no matter how insignificant the item seemed to be. And one of those many items that the Ramseys found in their house which they couldn't account for was the presence of a book titled Whirlwind by author James Clavell. And as it turns out, one of the characters in the book, Whirlwind, is a fictional descendant of the character Dirk Struan from the novel Taipan, the very same Dirk Struan character whose name Paul Peters used in his ransom note to Mr. Pulver in Australia 15 years later. Is it just a coincidence? I don't know. While Paul Peters appears to have very little in common with the swashbuckling Dirk Struan from the Taipan novel, the real Paul Peters, in a superficial way, does have much in common with Dirk Struan's fictional descendants, as portrayed in the novel Whirlwind that was found in the Ramseys' home. In the book Whirlwind, Scott Gavilan's father ran a helicopter leasing and courier service in Iran in the late 1970s, while in real life Paul Peters' father ran an airplane leasing company in Australia. And while the fictional Scott Gavilan was a helicopter pilot who worked for a helicopter courier company operating out of Iran, the real-life Paul Peters, who also had a pilot's license, worked for a company in the United States during the 1990s that was involved with leasing heavy industrial equipment such as cranes, airplanes, and helicopters to large corporations. On a side note, Paul Peters' brother, who was also a pilot, was once arrested for illegally bringing a very large amount of money into Australia in a private airplane that was owned by their father's leasing company. Concerning the Whirlwind novel, none of the Ramseys had previously read the novel and none of them knew where it came from, though they did concede that they very often had out-of-town guests staying in their mansion during the holidays, and with so many guests coming and going, they figured that one of the guests might have left the book behind. And the original team of investigators were prone to ignoring any evidence that didn't implicate the mother, so not much was made of the unexplained presence of that book. Now I'm going to list some other interesting parallels between these two crime scenes on opposite sides of the world. When the Mosman collar bomber broke into Madeleine Pulver's house, he carried with him a black aluminum baseball bat and threatened to bash the teenager's head in unless she would lock the collar bomb onto her neck, which she then did. Now, in the case of the Jonbenet Ramsey murder scene in Colorado, 15 years earlier, police found a black aluminum baseball bat in the front yard, which did not belong to the Ramseys and which police could not connect to any other of the neighborhood children. Now, kids will leave their toys just about anywhere, but children also remember every detail of their own toys and would not confuse a black aluminum baseball bat with, for instance, a wooden bat or a red or a blue bat when questioned. Jonbenet Ramsey was killed by a blow to the head with an unknown blunt object, and then subsequently strangled. 15 years later in Australia, it is likely that, if Madeleine Pulver had screamed or fought back against Paul Peters, she too would have had her head bashed in by a blunt object, such as the black aluminum baseball bat that Paul Peters carried with him when he broke in. Also, Australian officials obtained video from a sporting goods store which shows Paul Peters purchasing the black baseball bat shortly after arriving in Australia. The black aluminum baseball bat found in the Ramseys' front yard in Colorado in 1996 didn't fit in to the murderous mother scenario that was favored by detectives early in the investigation, and was thus minimized as an irrelevant distraction in the Jonbenet murder investigation.